The transmission came at exactly 3 in the morning, Earth Standard Time. Every screen on the planet flickered simultaneously. Television sets, computer monitors, smartphones, and even digital billboards in empty streets all displayed the same image. A massive throne made of what appeared to be crystallized starlight floated in the darkness of space. Upon it sat a being so large that galaxies swirled beneath its feet like scattered marbles. Ambassador Chen Wei was the first human official to respond. She had been sleeping in her apartment in Geneva when her emergency communicator started screaming. Within 20 minutes, she stood in the United Nations emergency chamber alongside 47 other world leaders and diplomats. They all stared at the enormous screen that dominated the wall. The being on the throne spoke. Its voice was not sound, but rather a pressure inside their skulls, a weight that pushed against their thoughts. It called itself the eternal sovereign of the cosmic throne. It claimed dominion over 400 billion galaxies. It had watched the universe form from chaos and would watch it return to silence. It had come to Earth because humanity had finally developed faster than light communication, which meant they were now worthy of acknowledgement. The sovereign explained that every species that reached this technological milestone was given a choice. They could submit to the cosmic throne and become part of its eternal empire. They would serve, worship, and dedicate their existence to the greater glory of the sovereign. In return, they would receive protection from the darker things that lurked between dimensions. The alternative was annihilation. The sovereign did not threaten. It simply stated facts. Species that refused submission were erased from existence. Their planets were dissolved. Their stars were extinguished. Even the memory of their existence was removed from the cosmic record. The transmission ended with a single instruction. Humanity had 72 Earth hours to prepare their formal response. A delegation would arrive to receive their answer. For the first 6 hours, panic seemed inevitable. Military officials argued for immediate nuclear launches, though no one could explain what good that would do against a being that claimed to predate the universe. Religious leaders demanded prayer sessions. Scientists desperately tried to determine if the transmission was genuine or some elaborate hoax. But the evidence was undeniable. Every major telescope on Earth and in orbit confirmed the existence of the throne floating in space beyond Neptune. Then something unexpected happened. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a researcher at Cambridge University who specialized in xenolinguistics, published a paper. She had been analyzing the sovereign's message for linguistic patterns. What she found made her laugh so hard that she nearly fell out of her chair. She shared her findings with her colleagues. They laughed too. Within hours, her paper had spread across the scientific community. By the end of the first day, the laughter had become contagious. The sovereign's message, when examined closely, was remarkably similar to the structure of religious texts from ancient civilizations on Earth. Not alien civilizations. Human civilizations. The syntax, the threats, the promises, the demand for worship. It followed a pattern that humans had created and abandoned thousands of years ago. The cosmic throne was essentially a massive advanced entity using psychological tactics that humanity had outgrown before it invented the printing press. Ambassador Chen called an emergency meeting. The mood in the room was different now. Fear had been replaced by something else. World leaders who had been trembling 24 hours earlier were now smiling. Some were openly chuckling. The Prime Minister of Australia had to excuse himself because he could not stop giggling. They began to plan their response. The delegation from the cosmic throne arrived exactly on schedule. 3 beings materialized in the center of the United Nations General Assembly Hall. They were tall and thin, their bodies wrapped in robes made from woven light. Their faces were blank masks of silver metal. They introduced themselves as the heralds of the sovereign. They had come to receive humanity's answer. Ambassador Chen stood to address them. Behind her, 200 representatives from every nation on Earth sat in their assigned seats. The heralds expected terror. They expected desperate bargaining. They expected perhaps defiance, which they had seen before and knew how to crush. What they did not expect was the sound that filled the chamber. It started with a single snort from the back of the room. Someone tried to suppress a laugh and failed spectacularly. The sound spread like wildfire. Within seconds, the entire General Assembly was roaring with laughter. Delegates slapped their desks. Some wiped tears from their eyes. Others had to lean on their neighbors for support because they were laughing too hard to stand. The heralds stood motionless, processing this reaction. In their collective memory of serving the sovereign for 700 million years, no species had ever responded to the declaration of cosmic dominion with uncontrollable laughter. Ambassador Chun finally managed to compose herself. She cleared her throat, though occasional giggles still escaped her lips. She explained that humanity had carefully considered the sovereign's generous offer. They were truly honored that such an ancient and powerful being had noticed their small planet. However, they would have to respectfully decline. The lead herald's mask flickered. Decline was a word it understood, but it usually came with terror and eventually submission after a demonstration of power. This calm, amused refusal was unprecedented. Chun continued. She explained that humanity had a complicated relationship with cosmic entities demanding worship. They had spent thousands of years inventing gods, worshipping them, fearing them, and eventually realizing they had made the whole thing up. The process had taught them something valuable. Any being that demanded worship probably did not deserve it. Any entity that threatened destruction to achieve compliance was not offering a relationship but an extortion. She paused to let a fresh wave of giggles pass through the chamber. Furthermore, she added, humans had extensive experience with tyrants. They had endured emperors who claimed divine right, kings who demanded absolute loyalty, and dictators who promised protection in exchange for freedom. The pattern was always the same. The powerful took everything and gave nothing back. Humanity had spent centuries fighting against such arrangements on their own planet. They were not about to accept one from space. The heralds transmitted this response to the sovereign. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the pressure returned to every human skull on Earth simultaneously. The sovereign was speaking directly to the entire species. It had expressed confusion. It had observed humanity for millennia. It knew they were a species prone to fear, worship, and hierarchical submission. Their history was filled with examples of blind obedience to power. Why did they now refuse what they had accepted so readily from their own kind? Ambassador Chen's response was broadcast globally. She admitted that the sovereign was correct. Humanity had a shameful history of bowing to tyrants. But that was precisely why they recognized the pattern. They knew what happened when power went unchallenged. They knew the cost of worship without question. Every mistake in their history had taught them to be suspicious of exactly what the sovereign. More importantly, she added, humans had discovered something interesting about themselves. When they stopped worshiping power and started questioning it, they became stronger. When they stopped fearing the unknown and started investigating it, they became smarter. When they refused to submit and chose to resist, they became more human. The laughter in the chamber had faded now. Something else filled the air. Not fear, not arrogance, just a quiet, comfortable certainty. Humanity knew who it was. It knew what it would accept and what it would reject. The sovereign's threat was real, but so was humanity's answer. The heralds remained motionless for several minutes. Then they spoke again. The sovereign wished to understand. If humanity was not willing to submit, and they were aware of the consequences of refusal, what exactly did they expect to happen? Were they prepared for extinction? Chun smiled. She explained that humans were always prepared for extinction. They had lived with the possibility of nuclear annihilation for over a century. They had survived ice ages, plagues, and countless wars. Every generation had faced some threat that promised to end their existence. And every generation had responded the same way. They kept going. They built things. They loved each other. They made jokes. They refused to let fear define them. If the sovereign wanted to destroy them, it could try. Humanity would not beg. They would not worship. They would fight if they could and die laughing if they could not. But they would not kneel. The silence that followed lasted exactly 37 seconds. Then the heralds vanished. The sovereign's throne remained visible beyond Neptune for 3 more days. Scientists observed it constantly, waiting for the promised annihilation. Military forces around the world stood ready for whatever might come. Religious leaders offered prayers. Philosophers wrote essays. Children went to school. Life continued. On the 4th day, the throne began to move. It did not approach Earth. It simply turned and drifted away, slowly fading into the darkness between stars. No explanation was given. No final message arrived. The cosmic throne simply left. Humanity never learned exactly why they were spared. Some theorized that the sovereign had been testing them and found their response acceptable. Others suggested that the sovereign had never intended to destroy anyone and had simply been observing how different species reacted to threats. A few proposed that the sovereign was not as powerful as it claimed and had retreated when it realized humanity would not be easy prey. The most popular theory came from Dr. Mitchell, who had first discovered the absurdity of the sovereign's message. She suggested that the sovereign had been alone for so long that it had forgotten what other beings were capable of. It had expected fear because fear was easy. It had expected worship because worship was comfortable. When humanity offered neither, the sovereign had been forced to consider something it had avoided for billions of years. Perhaps, somewhere out in the darkness, the eternal sovereign of the cosmic throne was sitting on its crystallized starlight and thinking about what it truly wanted. Perhaps it was realizing that demanding worship was not the same as earning respect. Perhaps it was wondering if there was a better way to exist among other species. Or perhaps it had simply encountered the one thing that its ancient power could not overcome. Humanity had looked at the face of cosmic terror and responded with the most human reaction possible. They had laughed. Not because they were unafraid, not because they were foolish, but because they had finally understood something fundamental about themselves. They were small. They were fragile. They lived on a tiny rock orbiting an unremarkable star in an ordinary galaxy among billions. But they were free. They chose their own meaning. They decided what was worthy of respect and what deserved ridicule. And when the universe itself demanded that they kneel, they discovered that they would rather die standing than live on their knees. The laughter echoed across the planet long after the throne had vanished. It was the sound of a species that had finally grown up. It was the sound of beings who understood that the greatest power in existence was not the ability to destroy, but the courage to refuse. It was the sound of humanity, awake at last, facing the endless darkness of space with nothing but curiosity and joy. The cosmic throne had introduced itself. Humanity had laughed, and somehow, against all odds, that had been enough.